So thanks for joining us again for Let's Talk Art. I'm going to try and go pretty quickly through my introduction. I'm Sarah Hall, the director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. And tonight, our Agnita M. Stine Schreiber curator, Daniel Fulco, and I are going to take a virtual look at the world that is presented in our recently opened exhibition, From the Pages of Pan, Art Nouveau Prints 1895 to 1900. This is one of two fabulous exhibitions we currently have at the museum. So visit between now and mid-January, and you can see both From the Pages of Pan and Joseph Holston Color and Freedom Journey Along the Underground Railroad, which will be the subject of our December Let's Talk Art. And I do want to remind everyone that our next in-person event at the museum will be Friday, November 4th from 5 to 8, and it's the Treasure Sale Preview Party. The Treasure Sale, organized by the museum's volunteers and the Singer Society, is our beloved and, might I say, very fun fundraiser in which we sell treasures donated by our community. On the 4th, it is $30 per person. The entry cost gets you a nice Friday night cocktail party and first dibs at buying. You can also come in and shop all weekend and check our website for the exact hours. As I wind up the announcements, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the organizer of the exhibition tour, Landau Traveling Exhibitions. And at the conclusion of the exhibition, the prints are going to go home to the collection of the Richard H. Driehaus Museum. Our Hagerstown presentation of From the Pages of Pan was made possible through the support of Howard Kaler, James and Melinda Marsden, Karen Spessard, and Visit Hagerstown, the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau. So thank you to them, as well as to the team at our museum, for making this beautiful show happen. And now I'm going to let Daniel do a screen share, and we're going to dive right in to Pan.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And we look forward to sharing our insights about this fabulous exhibition with you this evening. And we just want to mention that tonight's program is sponsored by Jim and Mindy Marston. If you have a chance to come to the museum, the show is on view through January. I believe it is 29th, if I'm not mistaken. So we hope that you can come and see it. The prints, as the title of the exhibition shows, are derived from the Art Nouveau period, which flourished from the 1890s to the early 1900s. These couple of slides here just show you some of the works of art and pieces of design from Art Nouveau. It's a French word that means new art, literally. In German, it's called Jugendstil, or youth style. And those terms may come up tonight. The style and movement originated in Belgium, and then it spreads throughout Europe in the 1890s to France. And tonight we'll be talking a lot about Germany as well. And it affected the visual arts and design, everything from graphic arts that we're going to focus on from the show tonight, to glass, to furniture, as you can see here in this slide, and of course, even to architecture right there, designed by, I believe, Victor Horta, the Belgian architect.
So I'm going to just say we're looking at all these curves, and if you think about another period in art history with curves, what is that?
I'm just think about the Rococo.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And there is this sense that, you know, in France, they really looked at Art Nouveau as a way of reinvigorating their decorative arts, you know, commerce, because Rococo had been dominant design in the world, and so they really were looking for another way to bring in a kind of beautiful, sensual approach. And quite honestly, the fact that it could be applied to all sorts of objects and not just artworks, and was appealing to women and people who made decisions about buying luxury items. It was very strategic, kind of the galvanizing forces that came behind kind of jumped on Art Nouveau and made it a thing for the period that it was very popular.
Indeed, Sarah, and the botanical forms are really central to it. Look here in this foyer of the apartment building designed by I think it's either Horta or Hector Guimard. The stalks of a plant become a pillar. They're cast iron and they hold up this staircase. It's really amazing to see how this sort of pushes into, living spaces and all kinds of decorative objects. And as we're going to see tonight, even into the publications like Pan. And Art Nouveau is very much related to the arts and crafts movement, which I believe will come up tonight too, that artists and designers and architects are returning to handcraft tradition. They don't want to make things that are mass produced. They want to make things that are handmade and in which special care goes into creating them in an era of industrialization. So those are some of the ideas that underpin our discussion tonight. And we have the Pan publication itself, and the poster that is on view in the Kirstein Gallery is right here. But the magazine was first founded in 1895 by a group of individuals. Most significant up here is Julius Meyer Greife, an art critic and an art historian. You also have Richard Demel, poet and writer.
I don't know if I'd want to work for him.
Yeah, look, he's like he's really serious.
That's an intense photo.
It certainly is. And then Otto Julius Bierbaum here, who's an art historian. And in order for this publication to take place, it needs money, and that comes from important museum directors such as Wilhelm von Bode up here, and then right here Eberhard von Bodenhausen, who's on the as they call it in Europe, the scientific committee, the editorial committee that oversees the magazine. This is a lavish publication. And we'll show you a slide in a minute, but check out the original poster to advertise the magazine. It's the words Pan emerge from the.
I'm going to interrupt with a, so Callie Mealy, who's our director of education, created a wonderful workbook for young people, but anybody can have a copy that comes to the museum. And she talks about the way lines can be used. Lines can have weight and lines can show movement. And she talks about lines being used to convey information, to turn words into designs, and she uses this poster, which is just such a great example of the way they're using the sort of anatomy of the flower to represent the magazine, which is an incredibly wonderful visual metaphor for this idea of intellectual and artistic flowering.
Exactly, that it grows, that those tools that are used to grow, to develop the magazine itself, set against the red-orange sky, and then in the background, this sort of sinister Pan, right, Sarah? He's peering over the hill.
like diabolically gleeful, I guess.
That's right. And of course, his name in Greek also, he's a god of fertility and many other things. He dominates the horizon there, but it's also this idea of all the arts being merged, as we saw in the slide before, into the magazine, new ideas and also ideals.
Right. I've had people come into the office even and ask about Pan. And I'm like, well, it's both the god and the idea of Pan, panoptical, panoramic, everything. So yeah, it's very, very clever and wittily done here in this poster. So if folks haven't noticed, it's spelling out Pan, but it's also spelling out 1895, the year, and every little flower leaf or petal is a page of the magazine with Pan's face on it. So just really, really clever.
Excuse me, what does panoptical mean?
Seeing everything, basically, all seeing.
And then down here, you have the official prospectus book that was produced, which lays out the tenets of the magazine and of the founders. And this was designed by a German artist named Franz von Stuck, who is very important in the Munich secession, which was a group of artists who sort of broke away from the academy, and they have very new ideas. There's that head of Pan, but Franz von Stuck's interpretation looks more like a decoration from antiquity that we might see in something from a Roman relief. So that's really quite beautiful, the shading there. And quite different from Josef Sattler. By the way, the artist is Josef Sattler, who did the poster. Now, when we do a show, the nuts and bolts of it are also very involved and complicated. And here we have a couple of images of our colleagues. Here's Donna Rastelli, and there's Sarah Wolf.
Everybody pitches in when we need an extra set of hands.
That's right. So we bring in some installation shots to show you what the show looks like, and here it was in process, beginning with layouts and cutouts, and then going to the actual hanging.
It's a big show too. It's 84 prints, I think, is the total number, and they are literally all from the pages of Pan. So Dan will show you the display case where we have the volumes, and if you were able to open those volumes, you'd see where it's marked, where the prints have been removed, and will be returned at some point too.
And there are those photos.
And the prospectus is darling. It's like a mini Pan. It's a really sweet little thing, which is what they would have used to sell their idea to this scientific committee.
Yes. And as you can see, this is a lavish publication. This came up in our discussions of the exhibition. It came at great cost. It was in a limited run. And the prints that are inside each of these lavish volumes were made in different printmaking studios throughout Germany, such as Leipzig, Frankfurt, of course, Berlin, where it's actually pulled all together, bound and distributed. But so many different printmaking enterprises, whether they do lithography, woodcut, engraving, or etching. So it's pooling all of these resources of master printmakers. And they each have to be made. Some of them that are color prints are going to take multiple plates or lithographic stones. One thing to mention, if you come to the show, look for some of our decorative arts from the Art Nouveau period that are on view. We have some vases, one here by Koloman Moser, and then in the background, a Lutz one, which I featured in the weekend art. So that way you could see the connections between the publication and decorative art pieces made during the period.
It's interesting because that first room, those objects kind of liven up the room and bring the spirit of Art Nouveau in a room that features a little bit about the history of the publication, and it has portraits and social realism. So it's kind of grounding us in the world of Pan. And then you walk into the next room and you have Jugendstil and symbolism and post-impressionism, and you kind of enter the mind more deeply, the sort of imaginative mind of the artist. So it I think works pretty effectively.
Very much so. At the time that Pan is produced, you have other magazines that are also made. And one of the artists that we'll be looking at tonight is Otto Ekman. Here's a cover he did for Jugend in 1896. And you can see another one by Hans Christiansen that was done for one from 1899. And then artists.
Right, those first two, furthest left and middle, are both Otto Ekman, right? And he clearly likes to work with sort of hot orange and yellow, as we'll see.
Yeah, this one's Ekman, and this one I think is Christiansen.
Oh, Christiansen. Okay, because there is a wonderful Ekman print of swans that's kind of similar to the herons that we have in the exhibition. So.
Yes, and we'll be looking at that print.
Okay.
You also have a little bit later in Vienna, the Vienna Secession, which you may well have heard of, with the art magazine Ver Sacrum, which has a number of notable artists, Austrian. So at this time, there's really, there's a lot going on in all of these countries in terms of trying to create a publication that pools the resources of graphic artists, of designers, also architects, and others. So it's really interesting. And here's one of those prints in the show that really epitomizes Pan, the Pater Barons, called The Kiss. And there he is on the right in a historic photo. But look at how different this one is from his one that he does a year later called Winter Landscape.
Oh, you can tell though, he likes those curving lines and sort of, undulation, which we'll see more undulation in his work.
For this one, it's amazing how he makes the hair of the two women pull them closer together.
It's like a frame. It's like an Art Nouveau frame, right? We've all seen those frames, and you can buy the sort of knockoff, Art Nouveau frames that are similar with their all intertwined edges.
Yes.
And so he's kind of, he's framed this doorway too. So you can see kind of similar interests, even though it's very, very different subject matter.
Yeah, and he's very interesting, Barons. He goes on to primarily be an architect. He does graphic design, and he develops some of among the first corporate designs in typography in early 20th century Germany. He even designs a house at Darmstadt, Germany, which is not far from Frankfurt. And this house is really interesting. It's
so charming.
Beautiful. Here's a view of the doorway. And everything inside of it is designed by Barons, from the light fixtures to the chairs to the furniture, wallpaper, curtains, I think almost everything.
It does go hand in hand with the arts and crafts movement. I think you mentioned earlier this anti-industrial return to craftsmanship. Of course, I look at this, I think of Charles Rennie Mackintosh in Scotland, a lot of kind of, mirroring and symmetry. Mackintosh may be a little more geometric than this. But it's a wonderful period for interior design and for this idea of integrated design. And you see lots of wonderful interiors, tea rooms and things being, thought of all in a piece.
And here in the music room, you see Barons really pulling all of those forms together, from the piano to the candelabra that are over here in the music stand. And then these really beautiful motifs on the wall. The painting, I don't know who did it, might be by him, but I think probably by a different artist. So it's a complete interior. It's a complete work of art. But as time goes on, Barons, he will actually become somewhat more geometric, and he will design a numerous industrial.
Well, and some of his students are, the biggest names in 20th century modernist architecture.
That's right. We have Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, go through his studio. And here we come to an artist in the show, Karl Kupping, and here are several glasses. This is a really wonderful print, and you can see the direct connection between he is a designer, he's a glass artist, but he's a printmaker too.
It's lovely. I was telling Daniel, this print has really grown on me. I find myself gravitating toward it when I'm in the room. It's graceful. It shows a lot. I know we've got printmakers on this call who should feel free to add anything to this, but it's the glassware is beautiful, but you're seeing, you can see the plate wiping, you can see the action of it being a print, and the light and dark, all sorts of things are working beautifully together in this. It's just really delightful.
Yes, he was an outstanding designer. Look at the use of the botanical forms, the plant stems, and the base that he creates here, combination of color. And then this example is just striking on the right. This one in the V&A Museum Victoria and Albert in London, and Corning Museum of Glass.
Beautiful, beautiful.
In addition, we have other iconic images in the show. Another favorite, Henry van de Velde, who is also an architect. There he is in action in his studio. This is probably one of his most famous images. this representing Belgian Art Nouveau, the Tropin poster for egg whites, Eiweiß.
So we can have a talk about this, but it's interesting because if you read about this image, they talk often about how it is groundbreaking because it's selling things, but it's not showing a product. But those are little chicks, I believe. So there is some imagery in there. I would argue that it's not completely abstract, which some things talk about it as a purely abstract image, but they kind of look like little dancing chicks to me. So.
Yeah, with the white down here, I had thought, when you're beating the egg, not that I want to make too much of a leap, it sort of reminds me of the whisking, Sarah, like when you're beating the eggs.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
But very fun. I mean, there's a delightful playfulness, right?
There certainly is. He did another version of it. This one's not in the show, but it says there, l'aliment le plus concentré, the concentrated version of the product. So it really makes a hit for the company. And then in that circle of people is showing you the similarity between Pan and other Art Nouveau publications. In Belgium, you have this Delft salad oil that is created by another artist named Jan Torup, who creates a poster for oil instead of egg whites. And some of these designs are just beautiful. The art books that are produced in this period, figures, plant-like imagery, it takes over the bindings of the books and their contents. And here we come to a great artist. Among the best in the show, certainly up there, Max Liebermann, German Impressionist. And these are two great prints that are in the realist tradition. And for Liebermann, he looks at the condition of ordinary people, of peasants, but also people in the middle class. Take a closer look here. You have the Keller Park in Rosenheim, which is in Bavaria.
I love that this is, a very dark print that's all about sunlight.
Yes, how it filters through the trees. What a contrast to the women gathering wood,
Right.
which this does not look like an easy task to get all of this bundled up. And Liebermann's picking up on something that was shown a lot by Barbizon artists, right, Sarah, like Rousseau, for example, or Diaz de
Millet.
Millet.
Right, the heroic lives of the peasants. I'm always the person who's reading things on Let's Talk Art, and I think this is a 1913 catalog for an exhibition of modern German art. I think it was at the St. Louis Art Museum. Sorry, I meant to write that down and didn't, but and it's describing Max Liebermann, and it says, Liebermann is simple and matter of fact, free from his early sentiment, concise to austerity, almost icy in his wit. Like our generation, he moves so rapidly, there is no time for a method like Menzel's. So they're talking about the wonderful German draftsman Adolf Menzel and comparing him. Liebermann never leaves anything to chance. Nature must yield to his temperament and conception. In being a modern virtuoso, he prefers media which are delicate and swift. His pastels and lithographs achieve the fairy-like exquisiteness of Whistler. So we get to see one of his lithographs in Pan.
It's just beautifully done.
And you can see, I will say, distinct expressions on the faces of these patrons in the beer garden. It gives you a real sense of the flavor of the period and the people.
He loved to observe cafe life, and he would divide his time between the Berlin area, and here is one of these beer gardens in Brandenburg, which again is in the south. So he would often spend other times a year down there, because Bavaria has for quite some time been a vacation spot for Germans.
Well, and you spent time in Germany, Daniel, right? So you are speaking from experience.
Indeed, I had many a wonderful afternoon at a Bavarian beer garden at that in the autumn. And it's very nice. In our collection, we have an outstanding Max Liebermann drawing of the French sculptor Constantin Meunier. And this was a gift of our founders, the Singers. And it's so spontaneous. That spontaneity, though, you see in the lithograph of the famed realist author, Theodore Fontana, on the right.
Well, you can see that in the description I read. Modern virtuoso prefers media which are swift. I mean, you can kind of tell, you see that in these examples.
This, of course, being a lithograph, but it comes across in many ways like a drawing. It's the way that it fades here down at the bottom and shares certainly similar qualities to the drawing in our collection. Now, an artist who's very different and from an earlier generation, Hans Thoma. An artist.
I love these Thomas. I will say, you know, it is a sort of archaic quality. They talk about him looking back to sort of German woodcuts and looking at like Chronic and Dürer, but it's also like you're in the Black Forest and you're inside a storybook. There's this quality to Thoma's work that I find just really appealing. And of course, it's funny because he is the person looking backwards in comparison to so many of the artists in Pan. Yet I love his work. And I did have some stuff about Thoma here too, but you talk and then I'll see what the good part is to read out.
There's something in this one that's melancholy and meditative about it. And there's this sort of a gestural quality to it that's really beautiful, absorbed in his playing.
This German art historian, Richard Mother, who wrote in 1907, and apparently he was, you know, more respected by sort of lay people than other serious scholars. He gets very overblown in his descriptions of the art is more him describing Thoma than Thoma's work himself, but he talks about, you know, the dark green slopes of forest, lowering rain clouds, dark blue horizons, moist fields, and solitary pleasance. Here he paints luxuriant green valleys of the Black Forest, traversed by glittering and rippling waters with warm sunshine, sleeping upon the clumps of trees. There, a landscape viewed by a traveler who's lying upon a shady slope, or he paints children dancing, or peasant lads sitting upon the stump of a tree in the garden playing the fiddle. The golden moon rising in the deep blue sky and scarlet flowers glimmering with the soft notes of the instrument softly and tremulously dying away amid the mysterious peace of evening. So clearly Thoma may be looking a little bit backward, but he can inspire.
He certainly can. And those words really, I think, speak to this image. He also, in his own way, different from other artists we're going to see, he's commiserating in a certain way and identifying with these people from his native Black Forest region. But look at how different landscape is on the right. It's so different. A color lithograph done on an aluminum plate. It's much more conservative. In my view, not quite as exciting as the one on the left, but very interesting. Nevertheless,
it is, you know, just full of charm. I mean, if you look at his work, there's a fair range of things that are almost surreal too. I mean, I guess there's the Böcklin, right, who we talk about, the sort of symbolist who becomes popular and kind of falls from favor, and he kind of falls under his sway in a sense, and gets more into these kind of semi-symbolist things later in his career. But no, I find a lot to love in Hans Thoma.
An artist who is quite different from Thoma. He's going to influence, Sarah mentioned before, Adolf von Menzel. Wilhelm Leibl sort of looks back at Menzel from the mid-19th century in this very beautiful and contemplative portrait of an old woman. And this is a very different take. It's much more sort of down to earth, nice play between light and dark. And that's going to influence a very important artist, and one of the most famous German women artists, Käthe Kollwitz. And this is really early, Greeting from 1892.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a little tiny thing, but it's consummately done, I think. And you know, if you spend the time to get up close and look at, yeah, the faces, it's really lovely.
And then you have over here the Basement Cafe in Paris, which relates to another theme, but this is very different from the family.
So we did, some of you may know, we did our Absinthe and Art Nouveau night last week, and I was looking for connections to Cafe Society, and I found a couple of different Käthe Kollwitz images in Parisian basement cellars, and there was a little quote here that's interesting too. While a visit to the dance cafes was a part of every tourist program on a visit to Paris, the cellar taverns in the district of the market halls were not mentioned in any tourist guides. Together with the German art dealer Wilhelm Ude, who lived in Paris, Käthe Kollwitz visited these dens of vice that a woman would only dare enter in the company of a man, if at all. And then here's the quote. I made her and the Russian anarchist Alexander Kalmykov happy by taking them to the cellars below the market halls with their low ceilings and outrageous graffiti. At that time, they were still frequented by a truly dangerous clientele of criminals with whom the three of us got on very well and provided her with artistic inspiration. So, yeah.
Yes, she certainly got around Käthe Kollwitz. Her work is, as time moves on, it gets more political. It deals with many social issues. She was very interested in the condition of ordinary people.
Right. Clearly, you know, in a kind of broad, very broad-based way, she was almost out investigating.
Indeed. And here's a portrait in our collection, an etching showing her first made in 1892 that we have. We've actually developed a small collection of Kollwitz, and hopefully we'll soon display some of those. But this is a really neat one. There she is by the lamp, illuminating her table. At that time, still quite young. Similar to Käthe Kollwitz, a very different artist in some ways, but still interested in ordinary people, Leopold von Kalkreuth. And these are really beautiful. The one on the left, Journey Home, is stunning work, as is Ninanai and Auntie. The auntie and the baby. He loves to explore light. And in this case, he's almost blacked out the image. It's the light comes from within. Clearly an influence of Rembrandt here, unmistakable.
It is a really hard image to read, and I will say that one of our employees, you know, said to me, you know, that she could put a copy, Photoshop, and lighten a copy, and put it next to it for people to read. And I said, well, you know, I don't think we should be messing with the way, you know, people need to figure it out. So if you find yourself frustrated, it's my fault. But I don't want to be like putting Photoshop copies of art next to the art. It's a moral issue for me, but
this one is hard if you're in the gallery because we have to keep the light levels low. Actually, here in the digital image, it's enhancing it, but it almost is blacked out.
You need to kind of find the lantern and let your eyes kind of adjust, and then you can make the shapes out. I often talk about, you know, when you do low lighting for works on paper, if you're in a luxuriously large museum, and you can have a sort of, you know, interim space where you gradually dim the light, it's easier for people to see things if you're already in low light. So this is in the first gallery, so give your eyes some time to get adjusted to the low light. We also have magnifying glasses for people to be able to see details of things, and it's worth it. I mean, at the opening, people were just having so much fun with the magnifying glasses.
And just a note, as we're going through tonight, when it says published in Pan 5, that's number 5, and each of them had different volumes. So the magazine ran from 1895 to 1900. If you're wondering what that is, that's what that means down at the bottom. So that would have appeared in that issue.
It's also really fun because we have facsimiles of the volumes. So you can flip through them. You can get a sense of the way they balance sort of articles with literature and poetry and, little tailpieces and decorative elements and, framing work illustrations versus like serious explorations of artists and featured prints. So it gives you a real sense of the whole magazine. And if you happen to be able to read German, all the better for you. But if not, you can still get a sense of what's happening.
In the Kirstein Gallery, which is the gallery that's Sarah's background there on the upper right, this print is in that gallery with the works dealing with social realism, Franz Garbina's Wagon in the Rain. And this is a beautiful one, fabulous combination of colors. The rain having dampened and made wet those cobblestones. You can almost feel that cold night. Very atmospheric print, beautifully done. And then some other works. We have Eugen Kirchner. Again, these artists often work in very different styles. And that's the thing about Pan is it runs the gamut. You can see an image that's very conservative, like the one on the left, sometimes by the same artist. And then they're going to do something entirely different, like Kirchner's November, which is influenced by Japanese printmaking techniques.
Of course, he's a pretty well-known artist with a prolific career, times in and out of sanitariums for alcoholism and depression and issues. You almost can see when you see two things like this, they're so contrasting, you almost can feel the struggle of modernity, right? Of change happening in society. And it should be said that while the left image is conservative, she's a new woman. I mean, she's wearing like the latest fashions, and she's being depicted by herself. And, she feels very much like a young, independent, woman who's, and I kind of love the frieze behind her, which has such attitude in it as well. Almost looks like a depiction of evolution or something, all those different attitudes. So, yeah, she's more conservative, but she's also of the time.
Yes, she gets ready to go out for a walk, as the title says, woman dressed to go out. And then in November, right here, this etching, the people are going out. It looks like they're on their, possibly their commute. And
it is so beautiful.
This is a really outstanding print. Dynamic, forceful movement, the wind sweeping the scene. And
I will forever think of that with associate that with November. And I don't know if you can enlarge it so people can read, see the shop fronts and signage back there, but it's such an interesting detail with this sense of wind and movement than to have this kind of funny little frieze of advertisements and shop signs in the background.
Yes, and this is made during a time when Berlin and other parts of Europe are industrializing rapidly. In 1896, you have the factories that are built. They were built earlier, but this is the ramping up of big industry. And you have factory workers, ordinary Germans, who are making their daily commute on foot. In some of the compositional techniques, these broad bands of the black ink here contrasted with the white, and the compositional idea, we might say, could have had inspiration from Utagawa Hiroshige, the Japanese printmaker, very famous, and this one from one of his 53 stations along the Tokaido from 1855. So Japanese printmaking techniques are influencing German artists too, like French artists.
There was something that, yeah, I was reading in one of the older books talking about where Lieberman becomes interested in Japanese prints, and I'm not finding it in front of me right now, but yes, they're all looking at Japanese prints. There's no question.
So from the Curator, we moved to quite a different artist, Aubrey Beardsley, who sadly died, I think at 26 from tuberculosis, well before his time. He was very controversial. He famously stated, "If I'm not grotesque, I am nothing." He was very outspoken. He was close friends with Oscar Wilde. And he, in addition to the Isolde print that's in the show, very famously did a series, this one called The Climax, for Oscar Wilde's illustrated edition of his play Salome.
There are so many Aubrey Beardsley stories. There's the quote that we used on social media the other day, in which Oscar Wilde supposedly describes Aubrey Beardsley as being like absinthe, as being, it is stronger than any other spirit and brings out the subconscious self in man. It is like your drawings, Aubrey. It gets on one's nerves and is cruel. So there is, a sharpness sometimes, and wit, as well as incredible elegance about Beardsley's work. And the way he uses white space, that contrast between light and dark, is incredible. And a lot of erotic subjects and a lot of kind of naughty things. And sometimes he would get called on the carpet and they would have him alter his compositions, but the editors wouldn't even see everything. They'd be like, cover this, cover the genitals here, and they wouldn't notice the other stuff that was going on that you had to look at more carefully.
This one on the right is derived from Wagner's Tristan di Isolde. Here she drinking the poison. And look at her figure. She's holding the cup up here. Her body is it's almost enormous. And look at the gown she's wearing.
I think you said when we were in the galleries the other day, it is like she's dressed in flower petals, like she is some kind of ready to unfurl a blossom. And the hat is extraordinary, which is something Beardsley was known for. These really, that looks kind of like a butterfly wing coming out over her head, but it has these giant kind of cup-like lilies or something on it. It's really extraordinary.
And this image appeared in the Studio, which was a magazine in some ways similar to Pan, though quite different, that was produced in England, in London. So Beardsley produced works for the Studio and also another publication called the Yellow Book.
Which he gets, it's a very similar story to one we haven't gotten to yet here about getting art director getting fired from a magazine, because Beardsley does get fired from the Yellow Book because he's continually pushing the envelope and trying to put inappropriate what they deem inappropriate materials in the book. And of course, yellow was the cover of French romantic novels, racy books. And so it's deliberately called the Yellow Book because it wants to capitalize on that sort of sensational reputation of books with yellow covers.
The German artist Wilhelm Foltz, when we were preparing the exhibition, I couldn't help but notice that perhaps he was looking at Beardsley. One of his depictions of Salome here with the head of John the Baptist on the plate, and here you have the gruesome sort of macabre quality of the head here that Beardsley depicted. Of course, Volz's take on it is quite different. It's almost it's like a shocking image. Look at her red hair contrasted with this shoreline, and then you have the head of John the Baptist with these demonic eyes.
Mhm.
But similarly gruesome to Beardsley's depiction.
Although I think in Volk's, she looks a little repulsed, like, she's backing away from the head, whereas in Beardsley's, she's ready to kiss it.
Yes. And that gets into his interest in eroticism, that is for Beardsley. And really quite a contrast to the more controlled depiction of Isolde on the right-hand side. There are other very interesting artists as well, represented another Englishman named William Nicholson, who was part of a group called the Beggar Steps. And some of these works are paving the way for pioneering graphic art techniques.
Well, and I think clearly influenced by Beardsley in the use of the white space on the page.
Yes.
Which is coming also out of looking at Japanese prints. So Beardsley's maybe translating it into this other kind of sensibility that's maybe, somewhat more simplified. And you see that in Nicholson.
Indeed.
I should say the last couple of images have been ones in which we have had some of our friends write visiting voices labels, which add a wonderful different perspective. So David Sturtevant talks about Japanese principles of design being reflected here in William Nicholson's print. I think we have somebody, Tracy Felker writes about the Salome print. So we have a variety of folks from the community contributing different perspectives, and they're really fun to read. And I always say it's like having a friend at your elbow when you're in the gallery who's telling you something else, something you didn't know before.
Now, an artist in some ways connected to, in terms of his aesthetics, related is William Morris. And then on the bottom there, we have Edward Burne-Jones. Morris, one of the most important pioneers in the English arts and crafts movement, which, like Art Nouveau, looks back to handicraft and medieval art making traditions to revive the arts and to get them away from that kind of industrial mass production. And this is really a beautiful frontispiece of Sir Percival of Gales that's in the show to represent the English contributions. And look, it looks like a medieval manuscript in many ways.
But we see, interestingly, these elongated figures that Burne-Jones does, which are kind of, in some ways, adapted by Beardsley. I love that Beardsley himself kind of feels a little bit like a Beardsley. There was the photographic portrait of him there, but he seems, I don't know how tall he was, but he has the longish face and very sort of dominating hands, and he kind of himself looks a bit like he's been created by Beardsley. And these Burne-Jones figures have a similar style.
They do, and I think there's sort of there are sort of counter or mutual influences going on at this time. Certainly Beardsley, I think, was inspired by medieval bookmaking and woodcuts and ink drawing. So it's very interesting to see this. Wilhelm Volz showed you before the Salome. This is his Dance of the Nymphs. It's quite different. It's very classical, but it has those kind of curves in terms of the dresses and the draperies of these nymphs who are performing this kind of classical dance.
And the Art Nouveau movement is very much associated with the female figure and kind of, using those curves to exploit the erotic potential of the female figure, as well as, sometimes not in kind of misogynistic ways. I'll say that. And often women, morphing into insects and other creatures, a little bit like we've got the mermaid in the show, and Salome herself is a little bit wicked and scary. So there's ambivalence there, love of the beauty, but there's a sense of ambivalence, I think, reflected.
Yes, and Fultz also was influenced by pre-Raphaelites like Burne-Jones, interestingly. So
And he doesn't look ambivalent here. They're all having a good time.
in this one, yes, it's more joyful. And now we turn to an artist who it switched gears. We go to France and the bohemian nightlife of Montmartre and other parts of the city. So Sarah, would you like to?
So I just, because we had done this Absinthe and Art Nouveau night last week, I had done that research. I mentioned a little bit of research into Cafe Society, and lo and behold, there is a photograph of Toulouse-Lautrec drinking absinthe. And so he is notoriously sort of immersed in the life of the cafes and dance halls and brothels of Paris. And so it's may not be the fairest photograph of him to show, but it is really interesting that I think he was so associated with this lifestyle that the picture was taken. It's staged, I believe. It sure looks theatrical to me, but
very much so. And speaking of the theater, we come to one of the most renowned prints and renowned artists featured in Pan by Toulouse-Lautrec. And this is really, it's an amazing work. It's called Mademoiselle Marcel Lender, in bust in French, or bust of her, an 8-color lithograph. Needed for 8 lithographic stones to have drawings put on them and for them to be colored, and to create the red for her hair, her headdress there, which is really quite elaborate. And this print is unique in that regard, in terms of it being made up of that many lithographic stones to make one image.
She's so arresting, and we were talking about this last week, that if you're standing in the gallery, she kind of commands your attention if you just stand in the center and look around. And I think it has to do with the way that Toulouse-Lautrec kind of exploits the page. I mean, he is, that's a painting of her on the right, but I think he is primarily a draftsman, very different than Beardsley. At the same time, he really knows how to use negative space, and he really knows how to use contour lines. And so in this print, where so many, I love this show and there's so much to see, but a lot of the prints look like prints taken out of a book. They look like pages of a book. The Toulouse-Lautrec does not. And part of it is, we're zoomed in on her. She continues off the page, and yet he's drawn this different frame around her. So she's not really framed by the page as defined by the sheet of paper. He's defining the way we look at her. And this is the example that in our little booklet I told you that Kelly, our director of education, made. She talks about, varying the weight of lines and the effects you can get from varying the weight of lines. It's just full of vivacity and personality here. And supposedly he was so obsessed with her, he saw her perform in this in Chilperic 20 times. There she is dancing the bolero. I heard he said that her back was his favorite part, although I've never seen an image of her back. Another thing I think worth noting is that there's some people have suggested that the green tones, particularly in the lithograph, are meant to represent the new gas lights in the theater. But of course, we know green was kind of an obsession. It's the color of absinthe. They called happy hour the green hour. There were these new aniline dyes for clothing that allowed them to have these intense green colored clothes. They were poisonous, but people wore them anyway. They were made with an arsenic dye, and they knew by the mid 19th century that this was dangerous, but people were willing to be fashion victims. So this green and pink, very Toulouse-Lautrec, but very 19th century, very of the period. You didn't tell the story yet about the controversy caused by this.
No, not yet. So basically what happens is the most conservative members of the editorial board for Pan force out Meyer Greif. This man, Eberhard von Bodenhausen, the art historian, he gets into an argument with Julius Meyer Greif because Meyer Greif very much admires French art. And Bodenhausen wrote in 1895, and I quote, "This adulation of all that is foreign reached its peak when Toulouse-Lautrec, the first and most inventive poster artist in France, sent us a color lithograph. The style of the poster would have caused the Parisians, who have a first-class technical training, to have jeered at him. And it is my firm opinion that he wanted to see how far the stupid Germans would go in their lack of national feeling and their blind adoration of the foreign. Here were two German editors trying to pass off as the culmination of art something by a new French artist, which was not only utterly superficial, but even faulty in its technique. I immediately told Meyer Greif at the Times that the sheet was the stone over which one of us would have to fall." And essentially what Bodenhausen does is he forces out Meyer Greif because he doesn't like this print. By looking back on it now, I mean, his critique is almost ridiculous because the technique's not faulty, it's masterful. It's an amazing print.
Isn't it wonderful that he wrote it all down for us, though?
Yes.
You could sometimes assume, oh, it seems like there was a controversy here, but he completely lays it out for us. That's great.
Indeed, and people like Bodenhausen. I mean, I don't know what happened later on. Germany at this time, it's beginning to gear up for a conflict with France, which will culminate in World War I and the war waged by the Kaiser against France. And that, I think, is beginning to play out here, German nationalism and wanting to keep the magazine, in terms of the conservative voices, to focus more on German art. Whereas Meyer Greif, he's fascinated by Toulouse-Lautrec and other French artists. And I just brought along a couple of his really well-known images, the Moulin Rouge on La Goulue on the left, and then the poster of Jane Avril. These are fabulous images. What a graphic artist he was. So dynamic. The forms, very bold and avant-garde for the time, showing the cabaret life. And if you come to the museum, be sure not to miss our poster from La Revue Blanche here, which again is a multicolored lithograph. And it's on view. It's quite large in our galleries.
So this is a good time to tell my last story from that I told on Tuesday night about Toulouse-Lautrec's legendary consumption of cocktails. He supposedly, in his walking stick, had it, manufactured so that he could keep a vial of absinthe or whatever he was interested in. He invented a cocktail called the Earthquake, which was supposedly 50% cognac, 50% absinthe, which would maybe quake you to the floor. But so this is it's Misha, right? Misha Nathanson, I believe.
Yes.
And he throws a housewarming party in 1895. So a few years before he does this, he throws a housewarming party for Tade Nathanson, her husband, editor of La Revue Blanche. And he had, this is the story, Toulouse-Lautrec outdid himself, serving 300 guests 2,000 cocktails, or so he proudly claimed, mixed in lurid hues of red, pink, yellow, and green, and apparently creating the desired effect, as several guests, including the artists Pierre Bonnard and Edouard Vuillard, left the party horizontally as they had to be carried off to an impromptu triage unit for the hopelessly inebriated. Clad in a I wish this would have been something to see, clad in a waistcoat made from an American flag and a shaved head, Toulouse-Lautrec staged the event. So quite a party, but a wonderful poster. And we, works on paper have to sleep a lot of the time. So that's a museum lingo for they're rested. They stay in storage about 75% of the time. So we track how long they are out on display. And we make sure that when we put them in storage, you know, so if this is out on display for 4 months, we make sure it stays in storage for a year before we show it again. So we track time on display for these. So come on in and see her while she's out, because once Pan closes and she goes back to storage, she will be sleeping for a while.
Yes. Now, despite Bodenhausen's opposition to Meyer-Greif wanting to include Toulouse-Lautrec, that doesn't stop the other editors of the magazine from representing different artists from France. So you have this print here, it's really quite nice, by Georges Seurat, called Nude Back View. Of course, Georges Seurat, the consummate pointillist French artist, post-impressionist, building up his compositions using little dots of color. But he was also an outstanding printmaker.
And if you look at the facsimiles of Pan that we have, you can see that we have a lot, that they showed quite a lot of Seurat. He's another, I mean, a lot of these artists died tragically young. And so actually, you know, Seurat dies in 1891 and Pan is 1895 to 1900. So this is one of the non-original prints, and it is a photomechanical reproduction of Seurat drawing in order to include him in the publication, because he is such an important figure to include, and still so influential in the whole movement of post-impressionism. So yeah, they have a number, and the same is said for the print after Degas here. It is another one of the photomechanical you know, reproductions after the artist.
And this is a really nice one in which Kruger, basically, he's reinterpreting Degas' Woman in a Tub, and or a similar pastel. This one on the tape, beautifully done, and it helps disseminate Degas' work to a German audience. And then here you have the followers, if you will, of Seurat. They include Paul Signac. And actually, what's very interesting is that we have this print called The Pier at Flasang in the Evening in our own collection. So at some point, we probably will bring it out. It's a beautiful one. It almost has qualities of a watercolor.
Many museums, if you look up, if you see the Toulouse-Lautrec in other museum databases, they're coming from Pan. You know, so people were collecting these prints from Pan. I should say, you know, we got a late start, so I think we've been going about an hour now, and I'm not sure where we are with our PowerPoint. We always run a little long. Daniel, how are we doing? Can we pick up the pace?
Well, yeah, we'll pick up the pace. I can also kind of skip ahead here if we want to select something else. I know we don't want to miss Otto Eckmann, for example, the Night Herons. So we'll make some selections from what I brought. The Night Herons is beautiful.
It's really, it's a crowd favorite. I love that print. Just so compelling. I love the sense of showing the ripples around the legs of the birds and the distortions of their of those. So it kind of grounds you, like you're probably looking at sunrise or sunset with this incredible fiery orange water. The birds are pretty sweet and realistic, but then that fun, that, you know, kind of like the Lautrec, he's framed it himself. So I love that drawn frame across the top with leaves that add to it that little Nouveau touch. He's a German, so we would call this Jugendstil. It's in the Jugendstil section of the exhibition.
As is Schwertlilien or Iris. This is beautiful, this one. I love this one. So graceful. And this is really quite different from his piece, When Spring Comes, which is decorative and more classical.
Right.
Well, the same artist.
Again, and I think if you look at him, I mean, you see a few things that he's known for, but you get a lot about, he designed a font, an Art Nouveau font that's very influenced, I think, by Japanese lettering. So that's kind of what, you know, if you've ever done anything, done any designs and worked with Ekman, the font, this is the man.
And there he might have looked at Hiroshige's Cotton Rose
Mhm.
or a similar work.
Beautiful.
We see those parallels. We also have very notable figures from German history at this time, such as Hans Johann Wilhelm Olde's portrait of Friedrich Nietzsche, an etching done after a photograph taken by the same artist when Nietzsche was in an asylum, a sanitarium. Called the series was called The Ill Nietzsche, and here he's sort of lost in thought and very sadly had a mental breakdown. But,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he's given more dignity in the print, right? You see the sort of sadness in the photograph, but he's heroicized in the print for sure.
definitely look at the eyes, the
Mhm.
intensity of them. This is also favored by the Swiss artist Félix Vallotton, one of the most important artists in reviving woodcut in
Mhm.
the later 1800s.
You see
He
that.
looks like he's sleeping here or
Yeah.
snoozing.
It is funny.
Robert Schumann.
Mhm.
And we mentioned also Böcklin, the Swiss-German artist, and that's Kruger's portrait, engraving after Böcklin's self-portrait of Death playing the fiddle. Right next to the artist, it's that
Yeah.
memento mori.
Breathing on his neck.
Yes.
Mhm.
Max Klinger as well, who was for a period connected with Böcklin, as I recall.
Mhm.
It's Penelope, and then the enigmatic philosopher of Death #2. A strange image, Sarah, indeed.
Yeah, it is. So he's sliding down this iceberg. Looks like he might have a rope, be somehow attached in some way, but he's reaching for his glasses, which have fallen all the way to the bottom. And then you have these renderings, kind of like maps, but they're also skull-shaped maps that talk about I think a choice between knowledge and ignorance, in a sense, knowing and not knowing. Yeah, what is the philosopher going to do? Maybe it's better to not have your glasses and not know. Is it better to have your glasses and see clearly and have knowledge? But Klinger, all of his work, I believe, is in the symbolist section, although Penelope she's very, very classical. She's incredibly moody. She's perhaps the most sort of defiant and moody Penelope I've ever seen, but
She certainly is.
she's really tired of weaving and unweaving, I guess. Yeah.
So
Right.
got maybe time for another one, and then we'll go to taking some questions. Oh, Anders Zorn is really.
Oh, those are brilliant. Yeah, really brilliant. And if we want to, I may not have it with me, but there was some great quotes about Paul Verlaine on his deathbed. Yes, here. In one of his last works, Confessions. So Verlaine, also part of this cafe society and the controversy that was everything, all the ills being blamed on absinthe. In one of his last works, Confessions, he said, absinthe was a horrible drink, one which should be suppressed by governments. And this is terrible to say, but he described it as a dog returning to his vomit. But he did enjoy it for a while, but blamed many of the ills in his personal life, I think, on overconsumption. But Zorn and the etching, I mean, you can recognize a Zorn etching. You don't have to be a real expert to recognize a Zorn etching once you've seen a few, because that line quality, all of that sort of layering of line is very characteristic of him.
It certainly is, and these portraits are quite different from the works that he was known for. He's one of the most famous artists to come out of Scandinavia, and in fact, at one time even more renowned than Edvard Munch from Norway.
Yeah.
But really outstanding.
He is a fun, I think, closely associated in the US with Isabella Stewart Gardner, right? I think.
Yes.
Mhm.
These are two in our collection. One, he's really famous for nudes and figures that almost look like nymphs or something from classical mythology. We have two nudes in the collection, and then Pilot, a man showing a woman how to swim, how to get in the water there. They're so different from the two portraits from Penn, but they're beautifully done.
Yeah, and that sense of a kind of momentum behind the line, a vigorousness to the way he works.
Yes. So I think we have some time to take some questions.
If we haven't lost you all, again, I apologize for the issues at the beginning and the fact that we're in a funny format, not our usual webinar format, but hopefully you've enjoyed yourselves. And yeah, we're happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Well, it's not a question, but this is Ann Finucane.
Hi,
I'm
Ann.
Hi, I'm
You
one
wrote
of the
one
printmakers.
wonderful labels.
Sorry?
You wrote one of the wonderful labels.
I wrote the one about the Zorn etching, and Verlaine was, I had to read up on Verlaine, of course, and see who he was. But it was a fascinating etching because having done etchings for many years, I could see how masterful he was in getting the different kinds of strokes. Mine in comparison were always so controlled, and his, even though he was in control of his medium, he was very expressive with his marks, and it really conveyed the kind of person that Verlaine was. So our group is going to be giving a demonstration and a little talk about printmaking on November 13th. So I would just wanted to invite anybody else who's there to come along. We're the Penswoods printmakers from Chambersburg, and we will be showing you how etchings are made and how woodcuts are made. And you'll get a chance to work on a woodcut yourself. So I just wanted to invite everybody to come along to that.
I think that's 2 o'clock on the 13th. Am I right?
I know I have to be there a lot earlier than that, but I don't know the exact time for you.
All right. I think it's from 2 to 4 on the 13th that we have
Yeah.
been advertising.
That's right. On Sunday. Yeah.
And last announcements from me, and if anybody thinks of a question in the meantime, that's fine. But the exhibition is up through January 29th. We have also, so I have it right here and in my notes. So on November 12th, we have a workshop for older teens and adults on artist books. So that's a workshop on the Saturday, November 12th. You can find information on our website. And the printmaking demonstration at the museum is Sunday, November 13th from 2 to 4. Penswoods printmakers. So a good weekend to visit, the 12th and 13th. If you like to stream art related videos, check out our YouTube channel, in which all of our Let's Talk Arts continue to live and are part of our library of digital offerings. And finally, if anybody online now with us is a member of the museum, you can spend your lunch hour with me on November 10th for our next online members art social hour. We'll be spending the hour talking together about Thomas Moran's Lower Manhattan from Communipaw, New Jersey. It's a fabulous painting I never get tired of looking at. So I hope you will all be online again with us soon. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the museum. And if we don't have any more questions, I think we can say good night. And again, thank you so much for being patient and managing to be in the right place with us.
Yes, thank you very much. And if you're able to, we invite you to come to join us on December 15th, a Thursday, for our next Let's Talk Art about the Joseph Holston exhibition, Color and Freedom, Journey Along the Underground Railroad, where Sarah and I will be joined by Dr. David Terry from Morgan State University. So, thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.